You already said that, I don't need to say it twice. Thank you for having me here today. I'm pleased to be here. I'm here to talk, as I said, about featured snippets and voice search. If any of you know about me or my company, you may think of me or my company as the featured snippet people. We spent a lot of time over the years talking about featured snippets. And recently we haven't been talking so much about them because my team had a mutiny where they refused to do any more research on it because they got sick of saying the word featured snippets. But we've decided that now's a good time for us to revisit the research and to dust it off and take another look at it because of digital assistants, they have this reliance on featured snippets, or at least Google's digital assistant. And because of that, we thought it was a relevant topic and we wanted to bring some research here today. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to, first of all, walk through the history of featured snippets, where they've been, what they're doing now. And then we're going to talk about the volatility of featured snippets. I want to help you understand whether or not it's a stable strategy and something that you can rely on. And then we'll round it out by talking about the cozy relationship between snippets and voice search. And it's a very cozy relationship indeed. You can heckle me on Twitter, @StatRob. You can bother my company and tell me how bad of a job I'm doing at GetStat. And you can use the hashtag Brighton SEO so everyone can follow along in my torment. If you're a real nerd for this stuff and you want to go super deep, go to getstat.com/BrightonSEO, and there you can download the slide deck, all the research, all the white papers, and basically everything we have and everything we know about featured snippets and voice search. Okay, let's do this. In order for us to accurately track the progression of featured snippets, we need to use a static keyword set because it's important for us to compare apples to apples. And in our case, we have a 1 million keyword set that's high CPC keywords that we've been tracking in desktop and mobile in the United States on Google.com. And I apologize that it's American data, but it's the best I can do. The first thing I want to know when I get the data into Stat is how many snippets are there today. And it turns out there's a lot. 31% of our 1 million keywords triggered a featured snippet. That's like a 230% increase since we first started tracking the data. So they're more prevalent than ever. One of the coolest things about snippets is that they're right at the very top of the SERP, right? Like Google has taken your content, put a big box around it, and said, this is the best content in the entire world to answer the question that you're asking right now. In fact, even the font size of the featured snippet content is bigger than any other font on the SERP. So it's this massive headline spot, and that's what's very alluring about it. So we wanted to know, is it always at the top? Because when we first ran the data over the last few years, we've always seen that it's the very first thing and nothing can be above it. And we wanted to know if that was still the case. In the most recent 2 runs, we've learned that it's not. 96% of our featured snippets were the very first thing on the SERP, but now all of a sudden 4% of them are in second place. Not a massive change, but interesting. We wanted to know what could be the thing that could displace featured snippets. Turns out it's those pesky shopping boxes. And no one's really surprised by that because people love them. So we see shopping boxes, we also see current events and sometimes things like Google Home Services ads in the US displacing the featured snippet. And whether that's good or bad for your site traffic or visibility, it's hard to say, but if you're in like a retail-centric keyword space or you're in a current events keyword space, it's worth noting that you could be competing with those elements above you on the SERP. The second most compelling thing about snippets is their source position. And what that means is you can rank in number 5 and still rank in number 1 in the snippet, effectively leapfrogging everyone else on the SERP. And that's really compelling because it means that you can kind of basically win the game without even playing by jumping ahead of everyone who's ranking higher than you. So when we first ran the data, we noticed that somewhere around like 30% of snippets came from position 2, and then there was this nice diminishing curve down the SERP. And I wanted to know, was that still the case? So the blue represents January 2016, and the red represents November 2017, our most recent run. And you can see the curve looks very similar. Around 30% are in the first place, and then trending downwards, dropping off after that first page. I want to make sure you can see that so I'm not blocking the screen. So in the most recent run, we've seen everything shift down by 1. And you may look at that and think, hey, that's kind of cool. It means that the bar is lower. I don't have to rank as high in order to be eligible for a featured snippet. Unfortunately, you'd be very, very wrong because what we're starting to see are people also ask boxes. So Google is now pairing a PAA box right next to the featured snippet 60% of the time. The most common sequence of results we see on a SERP goes featured snippet, PAA, organic result. 30% of the time, that organic result is the source of the featured snippet. Now, you can still rank lower. You can rank in position 5, you can rank in position 6, and you can get the snippet. So that's good news. You still don't have to worry about ranking super high. But the higher you rank, the more eligible you are for the snippet. So the same old rules of SEO apply, just rank higher. you definitely want to be on the first page. 99% of our snippets are from positions 2 to 10. After that, there's this crazy drop off. So you have to be on the first page. There's plenty of opportunities to rank lower, but the higher you rank, the more eligible you are. Speaking of PAAs, I wanted to talk about what other types of SERP features we see on the SERP and how those might interplay with snippets, how many of them co-occur with snippets on the same SERP. This chart shows the various types of results that we've seen co-occur with featured snippets and the percentage of times that they actually do so. The colors represent different date ranges, and the chart is maybe a lot to look at. It tells some interesting stories, and I'm going to quickly zoom into a few of them. First up is video. So back in April, 19% of the time we saw a snippet, we saw a video box, a standalone video box. And then in November, those standalone video boxes took a nosedive down to only 2%. But we saw this big increase in video carousels. So now effectively, 40% of the time we see a snippet, we see video. And this is significant. This is a very large degree of co-occurrence. What Google is saying is that they believe that video content is often a really good user experience for answering the types of questions they also seek to answer in featured snippets. So as an SEO, the takeaway that I get from this is, if I have opportunities to create video to answer the kind of questions that I'm also answering in featured snippets, and I have an authoritative site, I can set up opportunities to own multiple different placements on the SERP. Video, snippet, organic. It's a big win situation. You definitely have to think about whether or not your business is uniquely qualified to produce the right kind of video content. But if you are, I would suggest looking into it. Just keep in mind that because they're a carousel now, you have to compete with other thumbnails. You have to compete for visual real estate and eyeballs and attention. So take the opportunity to dress up your thumbnails and make sure you're using that opportunity strategically. The next thing I want to talk about is those people also ask boxes. You'll remember that I said that 60% of the time they're paired, the feature snippet and then you have the PAA box, right? This data shows us that 64% of the time, even if they're not right next to each other, they're on the same SERP. So there's a huge degree of interrelation between these two elements. They like to show up on the same SERP and they usually like to show up right next to each other. They're like best friends. Now, the advice here is pretty obvious. Those PAAs are just like a gold mine for keyword research. If you can pick your root query and then you can look at the PAAs and you can start to traverse down and build out a query map of your keyword space, your query universe, all related back to a root query. It's a wonderful way for you to map out different opportunities to optimize your content, find new queries that you want to target, and I can guarantee you that if you're interested in ranking in a snippet for a certain query, you should also be interested in ranking in the snippet for that query's PAAs. So the PAA box, the people also ask box, is a gold mine for that kind of information, and it's a really wonderful way for SEOs to start building out their query space. This chart is the most boring chart on earth, but it's kind of interesting. So, tiny little 1%, right? So whenever we looked at the data, we saw that we never saw a places pack and a snippet on the same SERP. So what Google was saying was that snippets have nothing to do with local intent. If there's any kind of local intent, that would trigger a places pack, and if that was there, you never saw a snippet. So Google had kind of two different interests here. But now we're starting to see snippets co-occur with places packs. 1%, sure, but it's growing. I just checked on the data like last week, and it's growing ever so slightly. And that's really compelling because it opens up a whole new avenue for local SEOs who have always been a little bit sad that they can't play in the snippet space. So if I was a local SEO, I'd be thinking, what's the link between these things? Where are the opportunities there? And I can show you an example. So this is from Stat, which is why the graphics are a bit weird. We stripped them out so it doesn't fall home to Google. And what we're looking at here is the keyword top casino. And what you see on top is a snippet that's addressing online casinos. And what you see on the bottom is a places pack that's addressing local Vancouver casinos. The Red Rock was a terrible casino. Anyway, what's happening here is that Google's trying to hedge their bet. They want to know, is the person looking for online or are they looking for local, and we're not sure, so we're going to show both. And it's their way of trying to satisfy ambiguous intent. And this is like a really big theme for Google right now. Let's try to nail as many of the different kinds of ambiguous intent possible. I have a few more examples later on in the slide. Okay, so the last stop on our tour to snippet formatting. You know that there are three core types, right? There's the paragraph, there's the list, and there's the table. This chart shows how often we see those different types of snippets. You can see paragraphs are still the most prevalent. 60%, they're kind of leveled out. And then we have an increase in lists over time and a decrease in tables over time. We believe that the lists are taking the space in the tables. We saw tables peak in July of 2016, and they've been going down ever since. And what we believe is that Google looked at the data and said, this is a bad user experience, we can't get this right. And I'm sure you've all seen plenty of abysmal table snippets. They're super common, right? I think Google knows this and they decided that they were going to turn back the course and give more of those to lists. Look at this thing, it's disgusting. It's like, view on Amazon, view on Amazon, view on Amazon, read review, read review. It's really hard for Google to get this right. Further, when we're actually talking to our digital assistants, we spent like 2 days yammering at it, and we never ever saw that when a table snippet was surfaced as an answer to a spoken query, that table was read aloud. Digital assistants don't know how to read tables because they don't know if they go column by column or row by row. That's one of those really subtle problems that's actually probably very hard to solve, and Google's just realized that it's not worth the effort, and so they've changed tacks. Okay, so that's a little like tour to snippet, a little bit of history. I want to spend some time talking about volatility. The reason I want to talk about volatility is because it's important to understand if you win a snippet, how hard you have to fight to keep it. And if you don't have a snippet, how easy is it going to be for you to steal one from somebody else? And when people are trying to like invest major budgets and effort into winning snippets, I want them to understand, is that a good investment over the long term? Is it viable? So back in April, we took we took our 1 million keywords and we ran them through Stat. We took the 232,000 keywords that returned a snippet, and then we tracked those for another 19 days. So in total, we had like 20 days of data and some 4 million snippets to analyze. And we created volatility scores and appearance scores. Now, a snippet can have volatility if it does one of these three things. If it disappears from the SERP, if it reappears after it disappears, or the URL changes. Appearance is really simple. It's like the number of days out of 20 that it appeared. For volatility, each one of these events was scored 1 point. The total of those scores yielded a volatility score. I'll give you an example. Of course, it's cats. So, 5 days of sample data. During that time, we had an appearance score of 2 because the snippet appeared twice. And during that time, it went through 3 changes. The snippet disappeared, it reappeared, and then it disappeared again. So that's a volatility score of 3. Very simple rubric, and works really well for yielding these 2 scores. Once we had all the data, we started to plot and chart it, and we were actually very surprised at what we found because we thought snippets would be highly volatile. They're not. They're super stable. 68% of the snippets that we saw in our study displayed 0 volatility over the 20-day period. That means that they showed up, they stayed the same every single day out of 20 days. And as somebody who may want to win snippets, you might be like, darn, this is making my job a lot harder. It means that it's going to be harder for me to steal one. But there are still 32% of snippets that have volatility, and we'll focus there and try to find some opportunities. The top left of this chart represents health, like high visibility and low volatility. You can see things all clustered in that one corner, right? In fact, only 28% of our snippets would be what we would classify as highly volatile. That's the ones in the bottom left quadrant. So what Google is doing here is saying, once we decide we want to pick a snippet, we kind of stick with that. Things all cluster towards the high visibility side of things. I'll prove that again with some more data in a second. So we have like 3 different kinds of volatility. We have that URLs disappearing, the snippet disappearing, the snippet reappearing, and the URL changing. Together, those 3 things have 5 potential combinations. And what we wanted to know is like what kind of volatility is responsible for most of the volatility that we see. This chart lays that out. And what we can see here is the most common kind of volatility is actually just URL changes. So 67% of the time, the volatility is just the URL swapping, which means that Google's very willing to shop around for better content and therefore better user experiences and satisfaction. Only 8% disappeared and never came back, which means that once Google decides they want to show a snippet, they're not often like rolling back that decision. They're fairly confident that they want to show a snippet based on the intent of that query. So if URLs are the key to volatility, of course we want to know everything we can about that, and that's where we uncovered the second most interesting thing in this study. We learned that 99% of keywords return only up to 3 different URLs during their time on the SERP, which means that if you win a snippet, at any given moment, you're only competing with 2 other URLs. So your competitive playing field that you have to worry about narrows dramatically, and you only have to worry about 2 different other sites. The advice here is that in order to figure out what those other sites are, and therefore to determine your competitors, you should be tracking this stuff daily, because that's where you're going to see the kind of nuance and the kind of change that happen day by day. And once you identify those other competitors, you're going to be able to go to their websites, look at their content, figure out what the hell they're doing better than you, and try to out-optimize them. So daily tracking makes that all possible. Next, we're going to look at the things that we discovered could correlate with volatility on the SERP, i.e., what sort of indications do you have that there may be volatility in your space, therefore like an early warning signal? The number one thing that we saw closely correlated with volatility was source position. So the blue represents zero volatility, the orange represents low volatility, the red represents high volatility. And as you can see, the blue is just like a normal click curve, or a normal SERP curve. And the other colors represent the fact that the lower down your source position is, the higher your volatility is. So the advice here is typical SEO advice, just rank higher. Yeah. Number one advice you're gonna get out of here today. But it's true. The higher you rank, the more eligible you are for a snippet, and the higher you rank, the more stable that snippet's gonna be. So if you're ever worried about like holding on to a snippet that you've won and you're really excited about it because it's showing great results for your business, focus like hell on ranking it higher. Okay, so that's a lot about volatility and a lot about the history. Now I want to talk about voice search, and everyone's been asking me about this, so there's some interesting stuff here. The most simple thing is that Google Assistant relies on featured snippets to provide easy to read out loud, authoritative answers to common questions, right? That's their like number one edge in the voice search war. So therefore, in order to win voice search, just optimize for snippets. And while that's not bad advice, there's actually a much more interesting angle to consider. And in order to do that, we have to go back in time a little bit. So, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, people used physical keyboards and they typed into search engines, and they made these queries that were like conditioned for search engines. The systems conditioned people to search in a way that worked for them, i.e. they removed stop words, they focused on key terms, they made these super robotic seeming searches for robotic search engines. Over time, search engines have evolved, and so too has their ability to understand human language, and importantly, the intent behind searches. And that's a good thing because it's a lot easier for me to change the way I type and write than it is for me to change the way I speak. And in order for search engines to work for voice search, therefore they need to understand human language. We're seeing really great examples of machine learning in action here in terms of how Google is able to pop out a search query from a spoken command. And I think that this is something that no one's talking a lot about, but has a very strong impact on the future of keyword research when it comes to voice search. Here's an example. I said, what are the best headphones for $100? And the query is, best headphones for $100. And then I say, what about wireless? And the query is, best wireless headphones for $100. And then I say, I meant 100 Canadian. And it says, best wireless headphones for 100 Canadian. So it's able to maintain the subject all the way through, which is really impressive. And it's also able to pop out a full sentence query from my spoken command. All this is a little bit of NLP magic in action. Of course, we have to focus on some of the ways in which it failed, because it's not perfect. So I don't know who on my team is obsessed with bundt cakes, but somebody is. And we asked, how do I bake a bundt cake? We got, how do I bake a bundt cake? That was fine. Follow-on query, how long will it take? We got, how long does it take to take a bundt cake? The other one was, how long does that take? How long does a bundt cake take to bake? That worked well. So in this case, Google's having a hard time interpreting the term take, right? And it gets it wrong unless you actually wanted to know how long it would take for you to take someone's freshly baked bundt cake, in which case you're a jerk. So yeah, but you can see some failures here, but they're humorous, but we're seeing it improve. I'll give you another example. In the sequence of queries, how do I bake a bundt cake? What kind of pan does it take? How much do those cost? The final query is, how much does bundt cake cost? That's not what we asked. A normal human would associate the word those with the previous subject used, or noun used, the pan. So earlier I praised Google's ability to maintain the subject all the way through. Here I needed to be able to switch tracks halfway through, and it can't do that yet. So we know that it has a way to go, and we're seeing Google make a lot of investment here, and we're seeing it improve rapidly, which is a good thing, because we asked it, how do I bake a bundt cake and does it take butter? And we were looking at a search for how do I bake delicious, delicious butter? Which is a very strange search. It was all Paula Deen everything. Yeah, so it has a way to go, but it's very impressive, and it's interesting because it's going to have a big impact on keyword research, I believe. So what does it all mean? It means that we're in the middle of a natural language renaissance. It means that Google is going to make amateur linguists out of all of us, and we're going to be arguing about semantics instead of SEO at some point. It also means that featured snippets are impacting voice search, or voice search is impacting featured snippets, I should say. We're seeing evidence that Google is starting to show more and more snippets for longer full sentence queries rather than showing more snippets for the traditional old school keyword-rich queries that we used to see. In our data set, which is relatively massive, we're seeing the growth of featured snippets happen for the long tail, not the short tail. This chart shows the average number of words in a query that triggers a featured snippet. Over time, it's growing. And when we bucket and weight the words in our data set, we see like how, does, what, to, is, much. All these words are triggering featured snippets more than any other words. And these are words that are used in full sentence queries. So the advice here is that if you want to optimize your featured snippets, you need to think about building long-tailed, full sentence keyword sets that you're going to track and optimize for. Don't think about optimizing for voice search on the basis of those really short-tail, old-school kind of queries. That's all about mining the PAA box, getting those full sentence queries, tracking and optimizing for those, because that's where the voice search is happening. It's not happening for short-tail commands. It also means that we need to think about what kind of format we need to get our content in order to get that information across well. And Google knows this, and this is where Google's interest in intent and their knowledge and intent really comes out. So we can piggyback on that knowledge by paying attention to the SERPs, which is a key thing that we do here at Stat. This chart shows two words, or pairs of words in the case of the one on the right, that trigger a certain kind of snippet, best in how to, right? So they're most commonly lists. We see this pattern play out throughout our keyword set where there are certain types of phrases or words that trigger certain kinds of snippet formats. And the advice is to make sure that you are optimizing for those formats in order to be eligible for the snippets that have those words in them. So your tracking regimen is going to help you uncover this as well. That's a ton of information. This is originally a 40-minute talk and I've compressed it into 20 minutes, so I'm surprised if your heads aren't spinning. I'm going to quickly wrap it up for you. First of all, snippets are on the increase, they show up a ton, they're super stable, it's a viable long-term strategy. We're seeing largely growth up and to the right, but that doesn't mean there's not changes. If you look there on the top right there, that's February. We saw this fairly significant culling in low-volume desktop queries that showed featured snippets. So there are changes, but on the whole, they're becoming more prevalent. We're seeing Google find more and more excuses to use snippets as a tool to solve certain kinds of problems. In this case, they're showing two different snippets in order to solve a broad or vague query, to be able to be sure that they're satisfying both needs of the searcher in the same way they did with that top casinos query. We also know that snippets are a cornerstone for voice search. So if you're interested in voice search and you're optimizing for snippets, you're getting ahead of that game. The advice here is basic and very simple. You have to track the featured snippets. You have to have some sort of tool or program that's going to help you monitor what keywords the snippets are showing up against, who's winning them, how they're changing, what they're doing in order to win them. That's what's going to help you have a viable long-term snippet strategy. There are plenty of different softwares out there that do that. Of course, Stat does that. And if you want to see how we do it, we're in the deep crawl bar over there, and we're happy to show you our SERP feature landscape that tracks all of this. Moz does it as well. The point is that if you're in any way invested, you have to look around and find the option that works for you. And that's the best advice I can give you today. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed the talk. Don't forget. GetStat.com/Brighton SEO. Download it all for you there.